Good morning. After another tumultuous week for the beleaguered Prime Minister, new faces to shore up Boris Johnson in Downing Street. This week, he lost 5 key aides within 24 hours. 6 more Tory MPs publicly called for him to resign. And all the while, police continue to investigate 12 parties in government during lockdown. Is Boris Johnson doing enough in the eyes of Tory MPs to save the reputation of his government, the Conservative Party and his time as Prime Minister? This morning, I'll be talking about that and, of course, about our rising bills with the Energy and Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng. For a broader view of what is going on in the Conservative Party, I'll be joined by its former leader, Sir Ian Duncan Smith. The Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, will be here. And it's not just energy bills going up. I'll be talking about food and petrol prices with John Allan, the chairman of one of the UK's biggest companies, Tesco. And as the Queen announces that she wants Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, to be known as Queen Consort when Prince Charles becomes king, we'll be talking to our royal correspondent live from Sandringham. Now, we were hoping to have the Prime Minister on the programme as the last in our series of leader interviews, but as you can see, he's not here. We do hope to speak to him, though, in the coming weeks. Reviewing the news on a very busy morning, The Guardian's chief political correspondent Jess Elgot and Daily Mail columnist Sarah Vine. But first, the news with Laxmi Gopal.
Thank you, Sophie. Good morning. Today marks 70 years since the Queen began her reign, making her the first British monarch to reach the milestone. Her Majesty said in a statement to mark the Platinum Jubilee that she wants Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, to be known as Queen Consort when Prince Charles becomes king. A date has been set for the Duke of York to give evidence under oath next month as part of the ongoing civil sexual assault case against him. Prince Andrew is being sued in the United States by Virginia Giuffre. He has repeatedly denied the allegations. The Prime Minister has announced the appointment of 2 new aides following a wave of staff resignations earlier this week. Steve Barclay, a Cabinet Office Minister, will become his Chief of Staff, while Gito Harry, a former BBC correspondent who previously advised Boris Johnson when he was Mayor of London, will become Director of Communications. An operation to rescue a 5-year-old boy who had been trapped in a well in Morocco for 4 days has ended in tragedy. Emergency workers were able to reach the boy, named Rayan, yesterday evening, but sadly he had died. The bid to free him had gripped the country and people across the world. Well, that's all from me. The next news on BBC One is at 12 o'clock. Back to you, Sophie.
Laxmi, thank you. Well, let me show you the front pages this morning, and very much dominated by one face, the Queen, of course. Queen Camilla gets royal approval is the main story on the Sunday Telegraph. The Mirror as well. Camilla will be Queen, the monarch's historic announcement in her Platinum Jubilee message. The Sunday Times, a picture of the Queen cutting her cake yesterday at Sandringham, and its main story, private schools gamed, it says, COVID to boost grades. This is the proportion of A stars handed out to some A-level pupils doubled when the pandemic halted public exams. The Sun on Sunday, Queen Camilla again. And the Mail on Sunday, Camilla will be Queen, but also another woman who is in a lot of the papers this morning, Carrie. And this is Boris Johnson's wife, and it's a book that's being serialised. It starts in the Mail on Sunday today. This is Lord Ashcroft's book. We will be talking about that in more detail. And the Observer's front page, again, the Queen and her slice of history. And Sunday Express, bullish PM's survival plan. Well, I am joined to have a look at the papers by Sarah Vine and by Jess Elgot. Good morning to both of you. Let's talk, first of all, about Camilla, Jess. There's lots of stories, lots of coverage of her all over the front pages and on the inside.
Well, I think obviously it's a big deal for the monarchy. It's obviously a huge statement for her to make, and for her to use that phrasing, it's her sincere wish for it to happen. But I think one of the most remarkable things about the story this morning is that it's so uncontroversial. I think Camilla has obviously embedded herself so deeply in the royal family that her relationship with Prince Charles seems so loving, so genuine, that I think over the years people have become quite a lot less puritanical about it. It was clearly a very messy start to their relationship, but you know, there's a lot of people in Britain who've had those kinds of messy starts to relationships and had divorces and found love later in life, and I think that it shows we've become a lot more tolerant to that, and especially that the Queen has you know, given this kind of signal.
And the title that she was going to have was Princess Consort, wasn't it?
Right, it was, and I think that the way that it was phrased at the beginning was that it was her intention, and it was all, I think it was briefed out that Camilla never wanted to be the Queen, that she wanted to be the you know, Princess Consort. I think obviously things have changed since then and evolved. I think Charles has made it pretty clear behind the scenes that he wants his wife to be the Queen. And, you know, it's gently, things have been scrubbed off websites, I read, since 2018. It's not been referred to on Charles's website. So clearly this was the direction of travel, and this seems like the moment to make it official.
And Sarah Vine, the message that the Queen has issued on her Platinum Jubilee is in the papers as well. Very warm words today.
Yeah, very warm words. And I think Camilla, as Jess says, has played the long game. I think she's earned the respect of, you know, the people, and I think she deserves the title. I thought her statement, the Queen's statement, was rather touching. I mean, it's just the way that she refers to her own absence that I felt, you know, in my sincere wish that when the time comes. I mean, this is, I think, you know, here we are. She's obviously thinking about the succession. She's obviously thinking about what remains. So for me, it was a little bit poignant, you know, especially given her anniversary. But I think the most important thing for the Queen is the stability. I mean, she's had this incredibly difficult year. Problems still with Harry, losing her husband. I think she wants to leave behind a monarchy that's on a, you know, solid ground. And I think Camilla is kind of key to that, because she is key to Charles. She's key to his personal sanity, and he's obviously, she is Charles's rock, and I think it's the right thing to do.
Let's move on, Sarah, to the story, the other woman, as I was saying, who is dominating a lot of the papers this morning, and that is Carrie Johnson. And you've actually written about her this morning in your column. This book that's being serialised in the Mail on Sunday now, I mean, what do you make of the stories that are being told about her, the take on the Prime Minister's wife?
Well, I mean, I said in my piece, I think it's sort of the equivalent of political slut-shaming. I mean, the trouble is, it's always the easiest thing to do, to blame the woman, and the truth is far more complicated than that. And you know, if Boris Johnson has given Carrie too much access or too much leeway, that's sort of his fault. He's the person in charge. He is the Prime Minister. He is the one who makes the rules and who makes the weather in all of this. And I think that there's always a tendency, you know, when a man makes a mistake, for everyone to say, oh, well, you know, it's obviously the fault of his wife/girlfriend. And I mean, I don't know Carrie at all well. I've met her a few times, really, and a long time ago. But I think the way that she's being portrayed as this sort of, I mean, I know the nickname Carrie Antoinette is witty and a good pun, and we all love a good pun, but I just don't think her head deserves to be on the block in this way. You know, things have gone wrong, and mistakes, terrible mistakes have been made. I mean, if the, you know, all the Partygate stuff, and I agree that all of that is completely unacceptable. But it's not just her who must take responsibility for this. Ultimately, I think it's Johnson and the way he's run Number 10. You write in your column this morning about your words, something you wrote to your former husband Michael Gove, and about how that was twisted and about how that made you feel. Yeah, I mean, I note that in Tim Shipman's piece this morning, there's sort of towards the end, there's some stuff about, you know, Carrie just having had enough. It is unbelievably damaging and difficult on a personal level when you're when the person you are is projected and filtered through the sort of toxic filter of politics and power, and then you're made to look like something that you are actually really genuinely not. And I mean, in my case, on a much smaller scale, but I mean, let's not forget that Carrie has got a tiny baby and a toddler. She's a mother. She's trying to make, you know, presumably she's trying to make the best of the situation for her family. And the mental toll on her will be significant. I can honestly say that, because for me it was just, I mean, devastating. It really left me in a very dark and difficult place, because it is, you know, it's yourself, it's who you are that's being totally traduced and presented in a way that is completely inaccurate. And it is this toxic combination of politics and power, and so many people having, you know, an interest in your life. I mean, you know, this is also Carrie's life. This is her husband, it's her family, it's the person she loves. So it's not always as straightforward. And I just think this one-dimensional trope, which is that, you know, cherchez la femme, let's blame the woman, is just lazy. And you know, this is the 21st century.
And Jess, I mean, you know Carrie Johnson, don't you? You
on a professional
level.
But on a professional level, and you know, obviously she had senior positions in the Conservative Party. She was a special advisor. I think that's and instinctively, you know, I agree with a lot of what Sarah says. Is some of the portrayals of Carrie have made me feel uncomfortable, in especially you know, the point that Sarah makes about the Prime Minister being ultimately responsible for his decisions, and you know, if he's swayed too much by his wife's influence, then that's ultimately on him. But I think that Carrie does have a different position than a lot of political spouses have, or particularly prime ministerial spouses has. She is, by all accounts, a political player. She has had senior positions in the Conservative Party. She is close friends with many of his closest advisors, and fell out with several of his closest advisors who have now departed. And so she clearly has a significant influence in the governing of the country. Now, we might think that that's inappropriate for her to have that and blame the Prime Minister for it. But I think because she has, to a certain extent, taken on that role for herself, you can expect there to be some scrutiny of her politics.
And what about the changes? Let's move on to the story in the Sunday Telegraph this morning. The changes at the top of, or in Downing Street, the new faces that have come in. Gitta Harry, Steve Barclay, what do you make?
Well, it certainly looked on Friday night, when the Prime Minister lost, you know, reams of his staff, including Munira Mirza, Jack Doyle, the Director of Communications, his Chief of Staff, Dan Rosenfeld, that it didn't seem like an orchestrated plan. But now, you know, the Prime Minister seems to have managed to get people in place. Two of the most controversial appointments are Andrew Griffith, who's going to lead the policy unit, and also Steve Barclay, who's the new Chief of Staff. They're both MPs, which might lead people to think, and especially people in Westminster, to think that they already had a job, and significant jobs. Steve Barclay's also going to be carrying on as the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, so basically running the Cabinet Office. These seem exceptionally huge briefs, and in quite a lot of conflict with their role as MPs as well. And
Sarah Viner, the big piece by Tim Shipman in the Sunday Times today about Rishi Sunak on manoeuvres. It's saying vengeful cabinet turns on the plotters Sunak. You've read that piece. What do you think of his insights into what is going on at the moment in Number 10?
I think it's interesting what he says. I think that probably the reports of Rishi being on manoeuvres are exaggerated, because they always are in these sort of circumstances, and people always look for a sort of potential successor, and he would seem to be the most obvious one, especially since Munira's husband, Dougie Smith, is quite not intimately connected. Sorry, that makes it sound much more exciting than it is, but is, you know, has worked with him, as has she. And I think what's interesting about all these changes is that I feel like it's Boris going back to basics a bit. He's going back to a lot of the people he has worked with in the past and who have been successful for him. So Gitta Harry, also Linton Crosby and Isaac Levido, and all of these people. It feels like he is just returning to his comfort zone, which has always, you know, been very successful for him. I mean, you know, Linton was instrumental in all of his, you know, political successes. So he's returning to the sort of safety of his fold, and I think that's probably the right thing for him to do. I mean, certain people like Henry Newman have agreed to move sideways. That's probably, you know, to allow these new people to come back in. And I think this is him taking it seriously and trying to, you know, rescue his premiership as in a way that he can cope with in the way that he understands, and he knows these people very well and their previous allies. So comfort zone, I'd say.
And let's finish on one other bit of news, and who'd have thought a month ago the papers have got very little about it, but COVID, intensive care free of COVID patients, and it's talking about the lack of how few people are now going into intensive care with COVID because of Omicron.
Yeah, there are some extraordinary statistics in this, and really, really positive ones. It should be said that there are only now 20 to 30 people going into ICU, compared to what we were seeing in early January. And it also shows that although the majority of those going in are unvaccinated, going into intensive care, that in fact the numbers are so low that probably it was right that Omicron is an intrinsically milder version of COVID, which is a great thing to have borne out.
Well, we have to leave it there. Jess Elgot and Sarah Vine, thank you both very much for joining us to look through the papers this Sunday. Let's have a look at the weather now, because it is not very nice outside my window here. Are you going to improve things for us, Chris?
Yes, to a degree, Sophie. Yeah, we've got rain across England, but it's showers that will follow. And across Scotland, we've seen those showers coming down as snow. There's more of that to come today, and particularly over the higher ground in Scotland, there'll be some significant accumulations, so there could be some localised disruption here. But it is an improving picture across England and Wales. We've had the rain and strong winds. That's clearing out of the way over the next hour or so. Showers follow. There are going to be loads of showers today, particularly across northwestern areas. Some of them wintry, but it's across Scotland that we have the major risk of snow, and there could be some disruption, 10 to 15 centimetres at higher levels possible. It is going to be a much colder kind of day as well. Now, overnight tonight, the showers keep going for a while, but eventually they'll give up the ghost and die away. Clear skies then follow for a time. It will be cold with a pretty widespread frost, and so there could be some icy stretches first thing Monday morning. But I think Monday, prospects for quite a nice sunrise first thing in the morning. We'll initially have these sunny skies, but it will then cloud over from the west with a warm front bringing some patchy rain and drizzle in from the west. It could turn quite murky around the coast and hills too. And we finish the day with some heavy rain moving back into western Scotland. So rain at times through the afternoon, but it turns a lot milder. Temperatures 10 to 12 degrees for most of us. That's how it's looking, Sophie.
Chris, thank you very much. Now, perhaps the most significant resignation in number 10 this week was that of Munira Mirza, one of the Prime Minister's closest aides, who'd been at his side for 14 years. In a stinging resignation letter, she told him he had let himself down by making a scurrilous accusation against the Labour leader. How much damage is all of this doing, not just to the Prime Minister himself, but to the government and to the Conservative Party? Well, let's talk now to the Conservatives' former leader, Sir Ian Duncan Smith. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. Is this Boris Johnson's last chance to survive this?
Well, of course, it's been incredibly damaging, and just the revelations about what's been going on in Downing Street, when others were clearly obeying the rules, and people in Downing Street had somehow managed to think that those sort of rules weren't applying to them at the time, no matter what they were doing. So it's hugely damaging to the public. It's cut through to them. They're very angry about it. Many of them have seriously lost trust. These are big, big crises that are hitting the government and the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister obviously is the man overall that takes responsibility, but lots of people down the chain must take a huge measure of responsibility, including in the civil service, for their failure to have had discipline and structure in that. He, of course, bears the overall responsibility.
Who is it damaging? Who is it most damaging to, the Prime Minister, or is it really damaging the Conservative Party?
Well, I think the two are indivisible at the moment, frankly. I mean, your leader of a party, when in government, is your party in a way. And therefore, what damages that individual also damages the party, so that it damages the reputation of all of us. It also, by the way, I think goes even further, because I think with this constant drip, 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 and the rows that are going on in Parliament, outside, the whole tenor of the political debate has descended into a very poor level. And that means also the public gets in despair, I think. And I've talked to people on the streets before I got COVID, and I was knocking on doors. I talked to people on the streets who were in despair about the whole damn process. And a plague on all your houses was also part of the statement that I was getting back in a way. So it damages, of course, the government, the governing party, us, the Prime Minister. but it also, as part of the backwash, damages the whole nature of how we conduct our politics.
So can the party recover? Can the reputation of the party recover then with the Prime Minister still in place?
None of us know the answer to that question, but all we can do is try to do the right thing, to allow the public to move on, but at the same time to restore that trust. Your respect and trust you have to earn, and when you lose it, it's a very difficult task to get it back across the board. And so that is going to be a huge task. The government and the Prime Minister has set out to try and do that. We have to recognise that this, I was one of those that voted against some of these changes because I felt they were far too onerous and tight. And we see now the consequences of those. And I hope we learn the lessons from that if we ever have to go into this area again, not being able to see loved ones when they're dying and not being able to go and see people in care homes. These things I felt were just too harsh. But that notwithstanding, we can't rewrite history. The reality is all of that. Now we have to recognise the public has been through an awful lot, and we need to find ways to restore, first of all, their sense that there is a government that they can trust, and secondly, their respect for that government. And the biggest things that are looming at them right now are the whole issue of the crisis around fuel and the cost of living, and we've got international crises. Handling all of these and getting the benefits of Brexit done are critical now for the government in these last 2 to 2.5 years. And failure to get that done will be devastating.
Is Boris Johnson then, for you, the man who is the right person to restore that confidence?
Well, he has to be, because he is the Prime Minister. He is the man that oversaw what went wrong. He is the man that now has to recognise categorically, as I believe he's beginning to do now, that these things need to be put right desperately. There has to be huge change. This doesn't guarantee anything. But my sense right now is that if we go and plunge ourselves into a leadership election, a vote of confidence, which in the end always damages leaders, even if they win it, and then maybe into a leadership election, into Nissan warfare, in the midst of which we're facing a big cost of living crisis. For me, the poorest in society have to be helped now dramatically, because this crisis is a combination of a number of things. And it can be resolved as a number of things. The cost of energy now has to be dealt with, and dealt with swiftly. And the government has to do more, in my book, to make that happen and to get the cost of living sorted. That is our #1 priority.
But the focus is still very much on the workings of Number 10 and the Prime Minister's leadership, and that's what a lot of backbench MPs are still very focused on and still very upset about. Do you know of groups of MPs who are working together to remove the Prime Minister?
You'll forgive me, because for the last week I've been locked down because of COVID, so I haven't really been in discussions with lots of colleagues. But my instinct at the moment is that most colleagues still take the view that we've got to sort this out, and sort it out in structural terms and get on and deliver. And those 2 priorities I talked about earlier on, which is, and I think the government overnight has made a big move now to start putting in a much better structure. What's been missing in the government at Downing Street has been discipline. Discipline is critical. It's critical if you're in the army, it's critical if you're on business, but it's particularly critical if you are in government. There has to be a disciplined structure where people take responsibility at every level for doing the right thing and doing it swiftly, and stop all these ridiculous personal debates and personal ambitions that are rocketing around the place at the moment.
You talk about personal ambitions. I mean, there are people talking about the Chancellor, for example. I mean, you've been a leader under huge pressure. You know what it's like to be in as a leader with, with people coming at you in all angles. Can you see other cabinet ministers like the Chancellor manoeuvring to take over from the Prime Minister?
Well, I don't know, because as I say, I've been away for a week, so I'm not quite sure.
You must be following it. I mean, you were very closely in touch. Come on.
To be fair, what's been interesting is I've been following it rather like much of the general public at a distance. And I must say that the sooner we get this thing into order, structured, and actually delivering, with Downing Street really at the centre of things and driving their cabinet ministers to deliver. There are huge amounts of things that this government, after 2 years of being buffeted, to be fair, by the most desperate pandemic, and Prime Minister taking some pretty tough and some of them very big decisions, which he's got right. But that notwithstanding, we've got to get on and do it. And if, and I say only if, because I'm not close to it, if there are certain individuals who think that they have a right now to make a claim on that sort of title of Prime Minister, well, fine. Ambition is a thing that exists in all of us, but it's ambition at the right time. And I would say to people, temper your ambition. The most important ambition for us right now is the ambition of the British people to come out of COVID, to avoid the most terrible economic crisis that is hitting them, for us to be able to deal with the poorest in society who will face that the worst. And that means things like seriously entertaining lifting VAT for the moment, giving them a way to do it.
You've talked about the damage to the Conservative Party, and you don't seem to put your full weight behind Boris Johnson as the man who would solve it. But do you think that Boris Johnson is the right person to lead the Conservative Party into the next election?
Well, I do at the moment. That's why I said that, as far as I'm concerned, the Prime Minister is the one that has to sort this out. The public will expect it from him, that he sorts out this whole crisis, because at the end of the day, he's the one that bears the responsibility for that crisis. He is the one that takes responsibility for the failures of Downing Street. Of course he does. He is Prime Minister. He now has to sort it out. We've seen the beginnings of change of structure, which is important, but we also have to see him get on the front foot and deal with this cost of living crisis urgently. They've started with a few measures, but I do have to say that we do have to rethink the way that we deal with our gas supply problems here in the UK, as we sit on an island of oil and gas. But that's another argument. My point here is that he has to be the one right now that deals with this. I am not particularly in favour of plunging us now into a mess of votes of confidence followed by leadership elections at a time when I think the British public has a right to ask this question. We elected you 2 years ago, and we did not elect you to sit there whilst our incomes are not enough to pay for the cost of our living. And I think we need to focus on that as the #1 priority and get it done. And the Prime Minister has to do that himself. It's up to other colleagues to decide what they wish to do. But my view right now is he is the one that has to resolve this and show that he's contrite, understands and gets it, what the pain the public feel, but also recognises he's going to have to change things and never, ever get to this point ever again.
So Ian Duncan Smith, thank you very much for joining us. Well, there is a perfect storm brewing this spring. A huge rise in energy bills for millions, a rise in national insurance, and inflation hitting its highest rate for more than 30 years. This all adds up to households in this country facing the biggest blow to incomes in a generation, and people are already feeling the squeeze, not least in their weekly shop. I'm joined now by John Allan, who is the chairman of Tesco, the supermarket that dominates the sector. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Customers, do you find that they are already changing the way that they are shopping because of the rise in prices?
To a modest extent, I think, Sophie. The food is a relatively small part of household spending. It's only about 9%. That figure has halved in the last half century. But of course, it's a bigger proportion for those on the lowest incomes. So I think we're concerned particularly about what can we do to try to protect those who are hardest up, who are going to suffer most from that. And in some ways, the worst is still to come, because although food price inflation in Tesco over the last quarter was only 1%, we are impacted by rising energy prices. Our suppliers are impacted by rising energy prices, so that the likelihood is that inflation figure will rise. But we're doing all we can to offset it.
So the worst is yet to come. How much worse do you think it could get?
Well, I predicted last autumn that food prices by the spring might be rising about 5%. You know, I sincerely believe that it's not going to be any more than that. It might even be slightly less. But that's the sort of number we're talking about. But of course, 5% if you're spending, as some of the least well-off families are spending, 15% of your household income is significant. And it troubles us, and I'm sure troubles many people, that people may have to struggle to choose between heating their homes and feeding their families. And that's clearly not a situation that any of us should tolerate.
And fuel too. Fuel prices, are you expecting them to go up significantly? You sell those on your forecourt?
I hope not. I mean, there has been a huge surge in fuel prices in the last year. And I think our hope is that they will now stabilise and ultimately come down. But they're unlikely to come down very quickly, I think.
Which products do you think will be going up the most? Because some people report that it's the basics that are seeing some big hikes in prices. Why are those, in particular, crisps, for example, seem to be going up disproportionately to other things? Why are those going up so much more than other goods?
Well, I think it varies product by product. You know, we have a very good commodities research group who track the pricing of the ingredients that go into food, and as a result, we actually understand when suppliers come to us with a price increase, whether that price increase is justified, which often it is, or occasionally whether suppliers are trying it on, in which case we have, you know, robust discussions with them. So it depends an awful lot on the underlying ingredients. And for example, coffee is an internationally traded commodity. It is going up. That is having an impact on coffee prices. But there are lots of other things that are coming down. You know, the cheapest tin of baked beans in Tesco today is 22p. 5 years ago it was 25p. So wherever we can, we're pulling prices down.
Do you think that people are going to have less to spend on luxuries now going forward?
Well, some will, of course, because I think the combination of increasing energy prices, the impact of national insurance increases on people's incomes, and to a much, much lesser extent increasing food prices, is going to squeeze, you know, the hardest up still harder.
There's been a lot of focus on discount ranges and offers and products that are on offer. The food writer and campaigner Jack Munro says that the Smart Price Basics value range products offered as lower cost alternatives are stealthily being extinguished from the shelves, leaving people with no alternative but to level up to the supermarket's own branded goods.
Yeah, I don't know about the rest of the industry, I can't speak for them, but that's certainly totally untrue as far as Tesco is concerned. We have 2,100 products on our lowest price tier, where we're either price matching against Aldi or it's our own exclusive at Tesco range, and that number has been increasing in recent months rather than decreasing. So that's certainly not true.
You are getting rid of Jack's, aren't you, your discount stores,
yeah,
and that puts 1,600
that was an
jobs at
experiment.
risk.
13 stores. We learnt a lot from it about operating more cost effectively. We've transferred those lessons into our main chain now. So the benefits, Jack's was an experiment, it ran its course. We've now decided we've nothing more to learn from it. So half the stores are being converted back to Tesco.
But shouldn't you be learning from that? You say it's an experiment, but isn't that a point in time when people really need things like that, discount stores, cheaper food that they can afford?
Yes, but they can now get all of that within their mainstream Tesco stores. So, you know, we have transferred the lessons, the learnings, the ability to create products that we could sell at low prices into Tesco mainstream, and there was no longer a need for a separate Jack's chain. So, you know, we're confident that, you know, we're holding prices down as much as we can, and there is really, and we will continue to do that because we're very conscious of how many of our shoppers are on very, very tight budgets.
Your profits this year are expected to be big, aren't they? Mm-hmm. 2.5 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Do you not have to accept, or will you get to a point where you actually make less profit in order to help your customers?
Well, we don't make an awful lot of profit in relation to our sales, you know, somewhere between 4 and 4.5p in the pound, which is an awful lot less than most other businesses. And we try to apply ourselves to other things. For example, you know, we've given in recent years over £90 million to communities to help them with local projects. We work very hard to minimise food waste by ensuring that surplus food in our stores flows to, I think it's now 5,700 local charities. So we're really trying very, very hard to do our bit and still make a modest profit, which frankly we need to be able to continue to invest in the business.
Food waste and packaging, those are two of the things that really exercise shoppers, aren't they? Mm. If you have a loaf of bread in your house and it says that it is past its sell-by date, do you eat it?
I do, and I think many other people do. And there is, I think, a reappraisal going on at the moment about whether sell-by or eat-by dates are over-conservative. And I think that's going to change in the years ahead. Quite a lot of those dates will come off. I know I can keep bread in the fridge for quite a long time beyond, you know, its official life. And I think, you know, savvy customers realise that as well. And food waste in the home is actually much greater than food waste in our stores. And although we've been working relentlessly to eliminate to the greatest possible extent any food that's wasted in our shops or in our distribution chain, actually people waste far more food at home. And I think one of the things we have to do is to help shoppers realise that there are ways in which they can have less food waste at home.
The Governor of the Bank of England says to help inflation, people should not ask for pay rises. Is that what you're telling your staff to do?
No, absolutely not. We think that, you know, our 300,000 colleagues, and we're the largest private sector employer in the UK, they deserve to be protected from inflation as well. And therefore, you know, we have given reasonably 5 to 6% rises to our distribution colleagues, and we're in the midst of negotiations which will probably lead to a similar result for our store colleagues as well. So I think that's the wrong direction for people to go in.
John Allan, thank you very much for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
Now, the cost of living is spiralling, and bills too. That's what's really going to be focusing people's minds over the next few months, years even. The Chancellor announced measures to help with energy bills, but says we must adjust to higher energy costs. What's the alternative? Does Labour have any better ideas? Let's talk now to Labour's David Lammy, who joins me now, the Shadow Foreign Secretary. Good morning.
Good morning.
Very nice to see you here. Global inflation is at its highest since 2008. Could any government really do anything to keep the prices down?
Well, we've got to. That's why you're elected. And what we've said is that the North Sea oil and gas companies have had record bumper profits this year. There should be a windfall tax. George Osborne had a windfall tax. Gordon Brown had a windfall tax. That's the way to raise the money so that you can get money into people's pockets. And under our plan, we would give people, the poorest people, £600. Under the government's plan, it's £350, and actually 200 of it is a loan that you're asking people to pay back over 5 years, which is a big gamble because, of course, prices may continue to rise. So I think it's important that you think hard about who can bear that cost, and it seems to us that oil and gas companies can bear that cost and not the general public. By the way, they did this in France. The French have just levied EDF 8.4 billion. They've asked to keep prices down. We should be doing the same in this country.
They are going to be making huge profits this year. I think it's 40 billion was one of the combined was one of the figures I read this morning. But when you say windfall tax, you are really meaning a windfall tax is a one-off tax. So you're just going to take it once.
Well, we've costed for from April through to next April. That gets people through to next winter as well. And of course, we'll look and see what the situation is at that point.
But that is the point, isn't it? Because, I mean, Ofgem itself says it's hard to predict how long gas prices are going to stay high, and they expect continued significant upward pressure on prices. This is not going to be a short-term problem.
But the bottom line is Shell announced momentous profits. They will go in dividends and shareholder buyback schemes. It's wrong that actually they should make the money. You've got to help the public at this time, and that's the scheme that Labour are proposing. Strangely, our scheme is costing 6.6 billion. The government scheme costs 9 billion because it's not properly targeted. So I think we've also come up with a plan that's fiscally responsible.
But given that this could go on for a long time, is your position to subsidise people's energy bills for as long as it goes on?
Sophie, look, I think it's right to say that the Labour Party is very concerned about cost of living, is very concerned about getting targeted support to those who need it. We will look and see, of course, where we are in a year's time. But of course, you can tell that our emphasis is to support people through very, very tough times indeed. We recognise that people are also seeing a tax rise under this government, with the tax burden going up bigger than it's been for decades. At the same time, the poorest saw universal credit cut. We've raised all of those issues because we're hugely concerned about the pain that's out there in the general public.
But my point is this is open, this could be open-ended, and these prices could keep going up and up. We don't know when energy prices are going to come down. It could be years to come. So are you willing, as a Labour government, would you be willing to subsidise people's energy bills as long as that lasts?
Well, I've given you the direction of travel.
That's the direction of travel, but that's what I'm asking you, yes or no?
Well, look, let's be clear, it's not a yes or no answer, is it? I mean, that would be facile. The truth is you're right to say that there may well be pressure on energy for years to come, and that's why we think the government are wrong to say people should be paying back after year one over 5 years. But it's also fiscally responsible to look at the situation as it is today. We've set out our plans for a year. We will look again, but we will continue to support people across this country. And under our scheme, 19 million people get that extended support because we think you should be extending the warm home discount to more people so that they benefit.
What about inflation and trying to stop inflation constantly rising? Do you agree with the Governor of the Bank of England about not asking for pay rises? Should people not ask their bosses for more money just to try and keep inflation in check?
Look, that's easy to say, but
well, the Governor of the Bank of England said it.
In the end, when people are seeing rising costs when they're going into the supermarket, they're having to sit in a cold house. They are concerned about how they care for elderly relatives, or indeed how they put food on the table for their children. Of course, pay has got to keep up as best it can. And we took a view, for example, last year, that our nurses should see the benefit of a pay rise, and we were in a different position to the government. It's easy to say that, but we want to support people over this time.
So people should ask for pay rises if that's what they want?
Look, I can't control, the Labour Party can't control private sector workers, but we can take a view on the public sector. We took that view historically with nurses in the NHS. Sophie, you know that I cannot set out our fiscal plans when we see a general election that may well be a few years away, and Rachel Reeves will be on the phone as I leave the studio. So
no,
we set out the plans.
Because the government itself has disagreed with the Governor of the Bank of England, and the Prime Minister has said, that he doesn't agree with it. You should ask for pay rises.
Well, there's not a difference between us. I've said that, look, we're very concerned that people can meet this cost of living crisis, and of course that's about their pay packet as well.
Let's move on to Ukraine. You are the Shadow Foreign Secretary. The Foreign Secretary is travelling to Moscow, we understand, this week. Does the government get any credit? Do you think it should have credit for the diplomatic efforts that it is putting into play to stop Russia invading Ukraine?
I do think it's important that we're united on standing up to Vladimir Putin, that we support efforts to respect the sovereignty of Ukraine and their territorial integrity. When I was in Kiev a few weeks ago, it was clear that that Ukrainians were grateful for the support that we've given to the military, the support that we've given to support democracy progressing in that country, and we're united in standing with the government and with our NATO allies to stand up to this aggression that the Ukrainians are receiving at this time. But it's also right, Sophie, that as we deal with Russian aggression abroad, that we deal with Russian aggression at home. And we have to fix the dirty money problem. We have this huge problem of money laundering in London, of corruption and fraud, of donations to political parties.
She said last week that's exactly what she was planning to do.
But she's not. I mean, how long has she been saying, where is the Overseas Territory Bill? Why has it taken them so long to get an economic crime bill? Why aren't they reforming the Computer Misuse Act? Why aren't they dealing with Companies House? Why aren't they dealing with espionage and reviewing our laws? The Foreign Agents Bill. There's so much that they're not doing. They are taking money from people linked to Putin, which they should give back. They're not dealing with our problems at home, and Joe Biden knows it. He's concerned, and it's been raised at the highest level.
David Lammy, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. Now, let's go to a moment of history. It is 70 years ago today that King George VI died, and his daughter, Princess Elizabeth, became Queen. She was just 25 years old. 7 decades later, she has reaffirmed her pledge to serve the nation always. She will be spending the day at Sandringham, and our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell is there. Nick, good morning. We'll talk about the news today, which is about the new title for Camilla that she will get, Queen Camilla. But first, it's a huge milestone, this, for the Queen herself, isn't it?
Morning, Sophie. Yes, extraordinary. 70 years, a span of years which is indeed unprecedented and extraordinary. It takes us back to the years after the Second World War, to a very different Britain, and yet the one steadfast, reassuring, constant presence in the background of all of our lives throughout all of that has been the Queen, and she is as committed to her role now as she was then, as the Archbishop of Canterbury was saying the other day. Her theme is, "It's not about me," and I think we saw that reflected in the statement she issued last night, talking about the future with hope and optimism, and signing off as "your servant, Elizabeth R." In terms of the Jubilee programme, I think that will be rather different to Jubilees we've seen before. She is rather more frail now, as people who saw her in Sandringham yesterday said, not quite as robust, but as alert and as engaged as ever, but I think this will be a Jubilee in which the people, if you like, come more to her than her going out and around the country.
And the significance, Nick, of the Queen's very warm words about Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, and the new title that she will have.
Yes, and you know, I think this is the most tangible evidence we have seen so far of the path being smoothed now to the transition to the reign of King Charles. And it really settles this issue. Otherwise, it would have been quite an invidious position for Charles to have had to have asked the government for his wife to be crowned Queen Consort, which is something that we know he has wanted throughout the years since their marriage. Buckingham Palace undoubtedly will be looking very carefully to see how this goes down, to see if people accept this. But I think that there is now clearly a feeling, and this is something that clearly the Queen feels, that Charles and Camilla deserve it, and that, if you like, 1,000 years of history and precedent should be followed, and the wife of a king should be known as Queen Consort.
Nicholas Witchell at Sandringham, thank you very much for joining us. And now to my final guest this morning, the Energy and Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng.
Hello.
Good morning. Boris Johnson, is this his last chance to save himself?
Not at all. I think the Prime Minister has been very clear that he wants a reset in Number 10. He was very clear speaking to Conservative MPs on Monday. And what we saw last week was him following through with that commitment. And I'm looking forward to working with him to deliver on the manifesto and spend 2 years levelling up, making sure that we have jobs, making sure we have inward investment, and that we can get out of the pandemic, rebound from the COVID pandemic.
Part of that reset, we know overnight the new Number 10 team, Steve Barclay, a Cabinet Office Minister, now has to run the whole of Number 10, the whole of the Cabinet Office, and look after his MPs. Is that even possible?
So Steve...
his constituents, I mean, not
Steve is a friend of mine. He's someone I've worked with over 4 years in different departments, and he's very well placed to do what the Prime Minister wants to do. And what actually the Sue Gray report suggested needed to happen was for lines of accountability to be much clearer in Number 10. So what Steve is going to do is he's in the Cabinet Office, he runs the Cabinet Office, and he's going to align the Cabinet Office with Number 10, and that's his new job.
But this isn't enough, is it? I mean, this is backroom changes. There was an investigation. The Metropolitan Police are looking into all these parties in Downing Street during lockdown. This is not enough to move that forward, is it?
I think it's a step in the right direction. And as you say, there are investigations as the Sue Gray report, and we can leave that to work its way through the system and see what happens. But as far as the Number 10 operation is concerned, I think it was very important that we had someone of Steve's experience. He's an MP, as you say. He's someone who's worked as Secretary of State in departments. He knows government very well. He knows the Prime Minister well. And I think he can coordinate the Cabinet Office, which up to now has been very much separate from the Number 10 operation. And I think this is a step in the right direction.
I was talking to Sir Ian Duncan Smith, a former Conservative leader, a short time ago. Is he right to say that this is doing lasting damage to the Conservative Party?
I think that the ongoing focus on Partygate is not helping anyone. We've got a serious agenda. We've got a potential war situation in Ukraine, Russia developing. We've got cost of living issues to deal with. There are very serious concerns about how we bounce back from the pandemic. So I don't think focusing on the parties is necessarily the best way for us to get through this.
We've already heard MPs saying that new staff in Downing Street is just simply not enough to move this on. They want new policies as well. John Redwood is calling for the Prime Minister to ditch the national insurance rise.
I think John Redwood has had a huge contribution on policy, someone I enjoy speaking to, particularly about energy policies. And there's a range of backbenchers and other MPs who have lots of interesting ideas, and I always try and engage with them.
And is that one that could happen?
Look, I think the national insurance issue has been settled. We've identified the fact that there's a huge backlog in the NHS. There's a huge looming issue of social care, and this was one way which we can actually foot that huge bill. And there was a debate in Cabinet, but I think the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have been clear that the national insurance rise is something which is painful but necessary to clear the backlog and make sure that social care is funded on a reasonable basis in the future.
Has the Prime Minister lost the confidence of his party?
I don't think so at all. I think that I've been an MP for 12 years. In all that time, leadership issues have bubbled to the surface. We saw them with David Cameron. We saw them also with Theresa May. I think a few people have said that they're not happy with the direction, and they've made their views publicly. They've expressed their views publicly. I think on balance, if you look at the party in the round, I think people are just very, very focused on delivering on the manifesto, delivering prosperity and bouncing back from the pandemic.
Does he have the moral authority to continue to lead it?
What I would say about that is that he's got a very clear mandate. The Prime Minister came in, we were confused, we had a hung parliament. He had a very clear message ahead of the 2019 election. We won a majority by 80, which nobody anticipated. He's got a clear mandate, and we've got to give him time and space to deliver on that mandate. And I think we are already doing that. We've got the fastest growing economy in the G7. We've also got the best booster rollout, the best vaccination rollout.
The fastest growing, it is technically correct, we have the fastest growing economy in the G7, but the last 2 quarters we didn't, and we fell to 5th place.
So we're bouncing back, that's the point.
We're bouncing back because we fell further than anybody else.
I want to actually accelerate that growth, and as Business Secretary I'm very pleased to be announcing all kinds of inward investment. Only 2 weeks ago we announced £2 billion in Blyth for a gigafactory making batteries for electric vehicles. These are positive developments. They're creating jobs and opportunity, and that's what I'm focused on.
I think one of the most damaging moments, or it felt like it this week for the Prime Minister, was the resignation of Munira Mirza, who had been his head of policy in Downing Street, as you know, for a long time. She'd been by the Prime Minister's side for 14 years, and she wrote that letter of resignation. And it was key to it was the comment that the Prime Minister made in the Commons on Monday about Sir Keir Starmer and Jimmy Savile. How much of a mistake was it for Boris Johnson to make that unfounded claim about Sir Keir and Jimmy Savile?
Look, I think that was it's a very sensitive issue, and clearly, there's lots of emotion, and what Jimmy Savile did was appalling. Having said all of that, I think that Sir Keir himself apologised on behalf of the organisation he read that they hadn't convicted him. That was something that he apologised himself, and the Prime Minister brought that up in the heated exchange of PMQs.
He wasn't involved in the decision, though,
no,
was he?
You're
and you
right.
know that.
And the Prime Minister, he
didn't apologise, exactly.
He clarified what he was saying.
He clarified, but he did not apologise, and that was exactly why Munira Mirza left. Should the Prime Minister have apologised for saying it?
I don't think so, because Sir Keir himself acknowledged that the organisation he ran was responsible for not prosecuting Jimmy Savile. So it's all about leadership, it's all about accountability. That's what we're talking about.
Do you think it's an acceptable thing to say in the House of Commons?
I think in the context of the House of Commons, in the context of the accusations about leadership, the debate about accountability, it was a reasonable thing to bring up.
But this is exactly what Munira Mirza was saying. It went beyond that, didn't it? It was not the rough and tumble of politics. She said it was a scurrilous accusation against the leader of the opposition. It was an inappropriate and partisan reference to a horrendous case of child sex abuse. It was unacceptable.
So I agree that the case of Jimmy Savile was horrendous, but I think that when people are talking about accountability and leadership, it was reasonable to mention that. Now, the Prime Minister clarified that he was not blaming Sir Keir personally for what happened, but clearly the whole conversation about parties, the whole conversation about that we're having about what happened in Number 10 is about leadership and accountability.
The Chancellor Rishi Sunak made it very clear he wouldn't have said it. Would you have said it?
It depends what the context
was.
In
that context?
Well, I think that things are said all the time in the House of Commons, and there's a cut and thrust, there's a sense of debating and making points in the moment. So I think it was an entirely legitimate thing to raise.
There is a bit of a running theme here, though, isn't it? Do you think one of the problems is that the Prime Minister has a sort of stretched relationship with the truth?
Not at all. I think he's very focused on delivering the manifesto. He was the one who said we should get Brexit done. On the back of that, we got an 80 majority. And then on the back of that 80 majority, we are trying to deliver, and I think successfully delivering, a fast-growing economy, and that's what I'm focused on.
Why did he say in Parliament this week as well that the government is cutting crime by 14%, when that's not true?
Well, I don't know why you say it isn't true. I don't know what the evidence is for it not being true. All I know is that certainly on the doorstep, people are saying that there is progress being made.
Well, he said that the government is cutting crime by 14%. It isn't true, because he hadn't included in that figure, and this is the chair of the UK Statistics Authority who said that, he had not included in that figure fraud and computer misuse. And the UK chair of the Statistics Authority says if fraud and computer misuse are counted in total crime, as they should be, total crime, in fact, increased, not decreased, by 14%. It's reasonable, isn't it, for people to expect that the Prime Minister is accurate in what he says about an issue as important as crime in the Commons?
So when people talk about crime, they generally, I think fraud is really, really important, but people are talking also particularly about burglaries, about personal injury, about physical crimes. And I think in that context, we're seeing lower crimes. I think the Prime Minister was right.
So, but what he said in the Commons, was that true?
Yeah, he was referring to personal injury and crime in relation to individuals.
But not in terms of total crime. What he said in the Commons this week was not true about crime.
The point the Prime Minister was making is that the crime that people experience in their day-to-day lives, in terms of fraud, in terms of burglary rather, not fraud, but in terms of burglary, in terms of physical injury, has gone down. That's absolutely right.
Let's talk about the cost of living and bills and these spiralling energy prices. The Chancellor said this week that higher energy prices are something we will have to get used to. Do households now just have to accept that they're going to be poorer?
No, I think that there were lots of interventions that the Chancellor made last week, which I fully support. In fact, my department worked with him and his department to try and craft that offer. I think what he was saying is that it's a global question. Energy prices, demand for gas isn't something that's set in the UK, it's a global price. And what we've seen over the last few months is massive increase actually, in global prices. That's what he was referring to.
But he was saying you have to adjust, we have to just get used to this, we just have to learn to live with it.
We may have to, because again, it's a globally set price. We don't have control over how much gas China is buying in the international market. We don't have control over what President Putin is up to. And so it's a global price that people are exposed to. And I think the Chancellor was being realistic when he said that it may well be, he didn't say it's for certain, but it may well be the case that for the next few months we will have to deal with higher prices.
But that's not much comfort for people who are now looking at their bills, their costs, their energy bills, their food bills soaring. How much more can you do to protect people in the long term, not just the short term?
I think you're absolutely right, and that's why the Chancellor came up with the measures that he did last week. You know, just £200 up front, to help with the bills, £150 off council tax for people in bands A to D. That's substantial help. We've also, and people often forget this, we've also increased the living wage from I think it was about £8.90 to £9.40 pounds an hour. That's significant. That's about £1,000.
The £200 that you're giving every household. I mean, that's a loan, isn't it? It's not money off. People have to pay that back
over 5 years.
And what if energy prices keep rising?
The money will be recouped. As I say, the gas price quadrupled, and it's very likely that it may well fall back. But as I say, it's a 5-year period over which the £200 will be recouped.
Why haven't you focused all of the money? I mean, there's £9 billion you're spending on this. Why haven't you focused that on the most needy rather than giving money to everybody?
So a lot of it is actually, and some people have been saying, well, we should remove VAT on energy bills. That would be regressive because you'd be giving everybody essentially the same amount of support. What the Chancellor announced last week was targeted. So the council tax discount is for bands A to D. So people in the largest houses, most expensive houses, won't be getting that. The warm home discount, which is again focused on the most vulnerable customers, will be expanded. So 2 million people currently are eligible for the warm home discount. That will be 3 million by the autumn. So that's gone up 50%. So a lot of this support, I'd say most of it, is directed at people on low incomes.
We're almost at an end now. Another tumultuous week last week for the Prime Minister. Do you think we're going to see a vote in no confidence in him?
Look, I think there's feverish speculation about the number of letters. I lived through 2018 as a minister, and there was lots of talk about letters. I don't think anybody has a clue, frankly, how many letters there are in, and I'm not really bothered about that. I'm focused on discussing cost of living, coming up with policies that deal with that, coming up with policies that encourage investment and growth in the UK.
Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
More politics follows straight after this programme on BBC One. But until next week, that's it, and goodbye from me. Have a good weekend.